Hi, my name is Stefan Demers, and I'm a program manager in Nike Supply Chain. And my focus here at Nike is managing a portfolio of automation investment that looks to bring automation tools across business processes, as well as using machine learning, really to the end of optimizing supply chain processes. And what I want to talk to you today is how I believe that we can enlarge the scope and the thinking of uh, automation at Nike beyond kind of a profit motive centered approach to including shared value and circular economic thinking in the approach that Nike takes. I want to start by talking about Nike's goals. So there are two big sets of goals that Nike has going right now concurrently. The first is bringing 2 times the speed to the rate that we bring new product to market, bringing 2 times the innovation to the technology that we bring internally, as well as the technology that we bring into our products, and bringing 2 times the direct. In other words, selling twice the product directly to the consumer, which effectively doubles the margin on every unit sold. At the same time, there are some impact goals. Specifically, by 2025, Nike is targeting bringing down our total CO2 emissions by 25%, putting zero waste into landfills from our footwear operations, and reducing our water use by 20%. So with that in mind, I want to start talking about automation. So why is Nike automating? Nike is automating because it makes transactions every step in our process less expensive. It makes processes more quick to execute with a more consistent process that enforces business rules. And we use machine learning and consistent processes as well to make sure that the quality of our decision making is improved and more data driven rather than subjective or ad hoc. The overall value that we're seeking from automation is to increase shareholder value. Automation has about a 3-year track record at Nike, and there's a couple stories I'd like to share. So the first one is that Nike is already using machine learning to help determine when we bring different launch products to market. And depending on what kind of launch and the timing, actually determining some of the attributes that product will contain. Nike's using machine learning to help decide when to use air freight effectively as a way to make sure that we're only putting goods on an airplane that are actually needed very quickly in the marketplace, so that we don't end up flying goods at a high carbon impact and a high cost, only to have them sit on a warehouse at the other end. And finally, Nike's using automation for our order flows. So for our process, from everything from getting a order from a customer like a Dick's Sporting Goods or a Foot Locker, through adding VAST to that order, all the way through allocating that order to the door of the customer. Nike has used business process automation and robotic process automation to make sure that those processes flow very quickly and with a higher level of quality. But I don't think that's the full story when it comes to automation, and I want to talk a little bit about what I think is missing. I think first, one of the biggest fears that you hear around automation is that it's going to create layoffs. And the last time Nike did significant layoffs at the corporate level was in 2017, and we're still feeling the ramifications of that more than 2 years later. So the thought that goes into automation needs to include what that automation will do in terms of impacting the workforce. A secondary impact to that workforce is, even for the folks that end up staying, there's a real impact that's felt in the culture. So following those layoffs, we saw the employee engagement surveys show that 40% of employees felt negatively about the future that they had at Nike. And we also saw concurrently that turnover became much higher, even in teams where traditionally turnover was very low. There's a secondary byproduct of this, which is the impact on communities. So whether it's the community in Portland or the communities around Nike factories around the globe, the perception of Nike is very much influenced by how good of a corporate citizen and how good of a neighbor Nike is. And there are times when Nike isn't necessarily a great neighborhood, a great neighbor. And you can certainly see that sentiment in the neighborhoods around Portland, and you can certainly see that sentiment in the news when Nike affects a local population with their manufacturing processes or the manufacturing processes of their suppliers. And finally, and really maybe most critically, because of the footprint of Nike, which is making about 1 billion units of footwear and apparel every year, we produce a tremendous amount of CO2 waste and demand a huge amount of fresh water every year. So even a small improvement on the way that Nike runs its processes creates a really big impact in terms of impact to global health and the climate change emergency. So I want to talk a little bit about what are the key components of starting to bring shared value in the circular economy into the thinking of Nike Automation. I think first and foremost, Nike leadership, which has done a good job about talking at a high level of kind of the impact goals that Nike has, needs to tie that mission to automation work. So that needs to be a message that's shared both internally and externally to talk about fundamentally a shift towards making sure that all process automation work should include or at least evaluate opportunities to have a broader positive community and global impact. The next piece is really to give employees the chance to own it. So this is going to be mechanisms for stakeholders internally and in suppliers to have a voice at the table as automated processes are defined. This is also a really great way to foster both better thinking and accountability. On the accountability note, as automation projects are identified and business cases are developed, one of the most key components long-term will be making sure that there are effective ways to measure the outcome. So there'll need to be a suite of reporting tools and KPIs developed to make sure that the goals that Nike is pursuing are actually being achieved by the automation processes that it's undertaking. The right folks have to actually be able to do this. So Nike will need to be able to identify a cross-functional team that has expertise in automation, but also in change management and in stakeholder engagement and in facilitation to make sure that there's a good group who can tie together the stakeholders, the mission, the metrics, and really make sure that we're making good decisions and we're moving quickly, but also moving as a team. The last piece is as opportunities get identified and we get crisp on what our mission is and the way that we're going to measure it, Nike will have an opportunity to identify partnerships, whether those are NGOs or other businesses focused on automation or academia. Nike doesn't have to invent all of this. There's going to be a lot of opportunity to partner with folks that are already out and thinking in this space and benefit both Nike from their knowledge and benefit those organizations with the power of Nike's scale and financial backing. So with those pieces, there's a pretty clear activation path at the beginning. Leadership needs to message really clearly about the value of this work and that they're behind it and what they expect from it. They need to hire on and build the right team who can bring a cross-functional voice together, who will actually be accountable for executing this work. That core team needs to engage the stakeholders and internal partners to collaborate with and bring along for the journey and really be the customer that's providing a voice. And finally, as there's better definition around the opportunities that will be pursued, that core team will need to be identifying partnerships to be able to really accelerate this work and benefit from existing knowledge and best practices. With those pieces in place, this team will be ready to go and actually begin building towards a pilot. A pilot is absolutely important. When I think back to the voice of the customer learnings and how to build out a new methodology in an organization, one of the most important things is that you've got to actually have some credibility, and credibility comes with evidence. So with that in mind, I wanted to pick a pilot project that a lot of people feel very personally, that has a great demonstrable impact, and that will be able to show real results, I believe, quickly. So for the pilot, I'd like to ask, what if Nike could cut their business air travel by 50%? And what we'd see from that is a reduction of 37 million tons of carbon annually, which is about a 5% reduction in Nike's overall CO2 emissions, which is very significant. There's an opportunity to save about $400 million a year. It means that the folks that are facilitating and planning all this travel would have an improved experience. And really critically, for frequent flyers, they experience very negative health outcomes, as well as a real risk to their family and their personal lives. So a lot of people have skin in the game, and there's a lot to win from this opportunity. With that opportunity, there's some folks that will need to get engaged. The core team will really be the one who's accountable for carrying the pilot, and they're going to be the glue that stitches the rest of these pieces together. One of the first things they'll need to do is identify the right stakeholders. I believe that this is frequent flyers, the support staff that facilitate all of this travel, leads in sustainability who will be helping to measure the outcome and really understand what can be gained, as well as leads from finance who can understand the financial impact so that as decisions are made around solutioning, there can be a clear cost benefit analysis. There will also need to be a dev team. The solution doesn't need to be clear from the beginning, but having some technical folks involved from the jump that can think in terms of requirements and existing technology and have input into what the market offers for solutions will be really important in making sure that the things that are considered have some groundedness and feasibility. And finally, there'll be an opportunity to engage partners as solution ideas are identified to be able to accelerate this work. So with that team in place, I see the first step as really understanding the job that travel does. And by the job travel does, I don't mean the jobs that are done to be able to travel. I mean, what outcomes do Nike employees seek when they go and they decide to go and get that first class ticket to the Netherlands or to Vietnam? So really getting a clear line of sight into why we're on the road so much, because we are a culture that is on the road a lot. With those outcomes really understood and the stakeholders clearly depicting what those the benefit that they need from travel is, I see this as an opportunity for the core team to start developing some broad and creative ideas with input from the stakeholders. So this can be a long list, and it can be anything. It could be video conferencing, it could be coordinated travel, it could be technology solutions that evaluate every potential travel opportunity. But fundamentally, it'll be taking a broad idea of how to address the outcomes that are needed and thinking about every way that they could be tackled. The next step will be winnowing down to the best ideas. And this could be done with Pug matrices and certainly with stakeholder input, as well as some rapid prototyping sessions so that the stakeholders could get an idea of what it would be like to actually experience this new approach. Through this editing process, ideally there is one winner that actually comes out on top that becomes our true pilot. And the pilot itself would be launched maybe just in one geography or maybe just in one team to be able to evaluate the viability and the tangible benefits of taking this automation or technology approach to reduce the travel that's done at Nike. Now I'm going to talk about how that pilot goes from small scale to actually a template for how automation innovation at Nike integrates across the board. So in this scenario, let's imagine that our pilot has gone and it's been successful. We've measured the outcomes and we have a clear idea of what we did through the process. It's going to be time to talk about what we did. And I really see the opportunity there for the core team as well as the stakeholders who have benefited to be able to go on a roadshow and talk about what they learned, what they found, and what it was like. They're talking about the value of the pilot itself, but they're also really going to be talking about the benefits that they've seen, as well as making sure that our partners in sustainability are talking about the benefits that we've seen in carbon reduction. As we started to build some awareness, the next step will be to operationalize. So from our pilot, we've learned some lessons, we've built some tools, we've brought in some industry best practices. Now it's time to actually codify those and start training other groups working on automation projects on the opportunities and the ways of working that the pilot team built. So at this point, we've gone from awareness to actually some people that are capable and have some knowledge to be able to do this work. The next step is to integrate it. So we've built our approach, and now it's time to really set the expectation that active automation projects are starting to bring in these lessons, both from a stakeholder and voice of the customer and impact perspective, as well as from a tools and approach perspective. And the idea is really that where there are opportunities to bring this learning and this thinking into active work, we're going to jump on those opportunities and we're going to expand our footprint so that the next step becomes easier. And really what that next step is that for our portfolio of automation, we've ingrained voice of the customer and we've ingrained thinking about shared value in the circular economy into the way that we look at all business cases for automation opportunities and the way that they get funded. And finally, I'd like to talk a little bit about what I believe that process could look like at Nike. So let's imagine we're about 2 years out from our initial pilot, and now all new work in the automation space is following a similar path in a portfolio of innovation investment and automation investment. So up front, we're seeing our stakeholders who are activated and engaged and know about the process, providing ideas. These could be ideas from the outside that maybe they've gotten from trade shows or from Gartner research or their own market research, or just things that they've seen in the way that they're working in their plant or in their function. And we really want to cast a broad net to be able to get good, consistent input. And as part of that intake, we would be looking for members of that core team to be working with those people that had identified opportunities and build them into robust business cases that identify both a financial upside, as well as, again, our impact to waste reduction, community impact, employee experience, revenue creation, and the reduction of costs. We'd be looking for a central body in our supply chain leadership to be evaluating those business cases with those values in mind and prioritizing them based on what they bring to the table and what the associated costs might be. Once business cases are selected, we'll be looking for the core team to go and identify stakeholders and make sure that the stakeholders are engaged as early as possible. And again, since we've cast a broader net for our ideas and our market research, hopefully some of those stakeholders are going to be more active and more integrated from the beginning, rather than having this be a step that purely comes afterwards. With the core team working and the stakeholders identified, the next step will be to develop the job map and objectives. And really critically here, I want to remind you that in that job map, we're not creating a process map of the way the work is done. We're really looking for the value and objectives that come from doing that job, because we're going to be looking at disruptive ways of doing that work. Depending on what the outcomes are and depending on what we're learning about potential solutions from our dev teams and from our engineers, it may be an appropriate time to engage partners. Again, whether this is NGOs, whether it's companies that are great in the automation space, whether it's the community or other groups. At this point in the maturity, hopefully there's a good, robust list of existing partnerships that this team will be able to draw on to bring in order to be able to go fast. So with our outcomes clear and the right partners on board, the next step will be developing solution. And really importantly, when we talk about developing solution, we don't want requirements to go in one end into a black box and then come back on the other end. Through this process, we want our developers and our engineers engaged. And at the same time, we want to expect them that as they're going through iterations, that they're providing those back to the core team and providing, when appropriate, demos to our developers so that they have line of sight to the work that's being done. Finally, we want to be able to evaluate outcomes. With the right KPIs in place, we want to make sure that as we've gone from prototype to pilot, we're very clear on the benefits that are being realized. And we want to be able to learn, evolve, and where appropriate, scale. And what that means is that we want to be able to take our pilots and make them broad-based and fully adopted throughout the company, but we also want to be able to evolve our innovation process so that the things that we've learned along the way are now built into the way that we work. I really appreciate the time. Thank you very much.